Var ni än befinner er, och varmt välkomna till det här tredje seminariet i Nordiska samarbetets program under årets digitala Almedalsvecka. Jag heter Paulina Modlitba och jag har den stora äran att leda nästa samtal. Ni har fått höra jättespännande samtal tidigare, om ni har hängt med hela dagen, hela eftermiddagen, om nordiskt samarbete, om integration under pandemin och så vidare. Nu ska vi gå över till att prata cirkulär ekonomi och hållbarhet. Framför allt så ska vi fokusera på hur man egentligen tillämpar cirkulär ekonomi i praktiken. Det är ju ett sånt där buzzword nu. Många som pratar om det som enda vägen ut ur pandemin. Det är nu vi ska passa på att kliva rakt ut i ett cirkulärt tänk och en helt annan verklighet. Men hur går det i så fall till? De flesta i den här panelen förstår svenska men pratar helst engelska. Så nu ska jag faktiskt gå över till att dra en lite mer omfattande introduktion på engelska. Och sen går vi över till att föra själva samtalet också på engelska. Så håll i er. In the Western world, we're getting closer to the end of the pandemic that has changed our society in many ways, both good and bad, and reminded us of our vulnerability. On the positive side, we have witnessed a record-breaking innovation pace and level, and the crisis has forced us to collaborate across the borders to solve the huge challenges that we have faced and will face in the future. The pandemic, or crisis, has made these challenges even more obvious and clear. And needless to say, the climate crisis is one of the most urgent, highly intertwined with other challenges. In this panel, we're focusing on sustainability and more specifically on the circular economy. Sweden have introduced a national strategy last year, and there are plenty of other global or cross-disciplinary strategies, frameworks, and goals. But how do we implement these strategies and frameworks and put them into practice? And how do we make this into a joint effort in the Nordics? And maybe most importantly, where do we find the focus, the resources, time and energy to make this change and transition after a pandemic, when many companies and organizations have been struggling hard and some are even close to buckling under? These are some of the questions that we're targeting today. We have three panelists coming at you digitally, joining the panel virtually. And we have one panelist sitting here next to me. And I will introduce them one by one. And I will start with Nina Ågård, who's sitting next to me here at Kulturhuset in Stockholm. Welcome, Nina.
Thank you.
You are here as a representative for Nordic Innovation, who's one of the organizations or part of broadcasting this panel today. And you're the CEO, but you have a background within the Finnish government trade and worked with investment promotion and worked in the private sector as well.
Yes.
So you have many different perspectives, but you're here today mainly to talk about sort of Nordic innovations perspective, the public sector perspective,
yes,
and also we'll get to the playbook that you've developed,
yes,
to help companies, organizations understand, sort of provide tools for making this transition into a circular economy. So I'm looking forward to it. Welcome. And with us virtually, to start with, we have Catherine, and now I realized I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. Maybe Wallén. You will have to correct me, Catherine. How do you pronounce your last name?
Well, I would say Wallén, but Wallén is perfectly fine.
Oh, I can hear Catherine properly. Can you please make the volume a little louder? Let's try again, Catherine.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. So how do
Nice to see you today, Paulina.
So how do you pronounce your name?
Catherine Wallén.
Wallén, yes. You have a PhD in industrial environment economics. You're a researcher at RISE, and you're also a host of the Getting in the Loop podcast. So you're here mainly to represent the academic sort of research side of this. Welcome.
Thank you, Paulina.
And we have two persons joining us who have more of, I'd say, well, to a certain extent, hands-on perspective on things. They're running companies who are targeting or actually living the circular economy already. The first one being Sebastian Holmström, who's responsible, he's the circular strategy lead at Inrego, a company that's extending the lifetime of IT products by selling used IT products. Welcome, Sebastian.
Thank you very much.
And we also have Juan Medina, who's the co-founder and CEO of another very exciting company, Café Bueno, a company that utilizes coffee byproducts in different ways. So this is all about sort of making coffee production into a circular economy. So you use coffee byproducts to make used ingredients for personal care, for functional food, beverages, to name a few areas. Welcome, Juan.
Thank you, Paulina. Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So let's start with, I already mentioned that circular economy is a very sort of broadly used, certainly sort of one of the most popular sort of terms right now. And I would like to start with breaking down the term and sort of talk about what it actually means from your very different perspectives. So Nina, let's start with you. How would you define circular economy and why is it important? Why are we having a panel about circular economy?
Well, we are having the panel about this because it's we have a climate emergency, we have a lot of the societal problems, as you mentioned, and circular economy is one of the strategies that we can use to manage those problems. And first and foremost, for me in my work, we think that circular economy is economical logic. So rethinking our resources and investments, and moving also from thinking of a single product or a single service to think about the whole value chain and impact of those value chains.
So it's not a transition that you make in just one day like this. It's a whole different mindset.
Yes, it's a different mindset, and it's not definitely nothing that we can do in a one day, but we have to start from somewhere.
We have to start,
yes.
and we're going to talk about how.
Yes.
Yes. Exactly. Catherine, what about you? What would you say is your definition of circular economy?
Well, I very much liked Nina's understanding of circular economy, and I think I would emphasize the fact, to me, circular economy is about retaining the value of products and materials and resources that we have in society. And one of the things that a lot of people, I think, automatically assume that circular economy is about recycling. But for me, it's more than just recycling. It's about, again, retaining the value of everything that we are using. So not just recycling, but also repairing things when we're finished with them, refurbishing things, remanufacturing, designing products to be used not just once, but again, and again.
Yes. And for me, one of the most important aha moments when it comes to circular economy is realizing that, you know, if you want to do this right, you should consider the circular economy of things, you know, in the beginning of the production sort of line. So even before you start producing something, you should prepare for it to actually be reused or being part of a circular economy.
Exactly, Paulina.
What about you, Sebastian?
I think there's been some really great points being put out there, and I think the essential thing is that it is not recycling on steroids. It is going way beyond that. It's about keeping products in use. And I think sometimes we're focusing too much upon the definition of the circular economy, and we need to focus on the action and putting it into action while also still keeping off figuring out the definition. And but it's basically, and if you listen to the EMF, it's about designing out waste and pollution and about keeping products and materials in use. And I think, as Nina said, this is a tool to achieve our climate and environmental goals. The circular economy, at least for myself, it's not an end goal, but it's a tool for reaching other goals that we have in our society.
And when it comes to Inrego, we already heard Catherine define circular economy as not just being recycling. You're reselling used IT products. Are you also sort of in other ways working on making the whole IT infrastructure value chain more sustainable and circular?
Definitely. We're always trying to innovate and do things better. And we've been doing this since 1995, buying, fixing, selling used electronics. And of course, we need to do this in a better way. And in some regards, it's only a semi-circular strategy because the products are already designed, but we're prolonging the life of what's already out there. And we're trying to do that in every possible way we can. We're trying to reuse spare parts. If we cannot reuse them, we're trying to, for example, also resell products as a service, so we can get the products in again, and then we can resell the same computer not only 2 times, but 3 times, and in some cases even more than that. So we're always trying to innovate this, and we don't want to sell any products in the Nordics. We want to rent them, but it's a challenge there with the consumer behavior and the culture of ownership.
Great. And Juan, last but not least, tell us about Café Bueno and sort of your view on what you're doing and what the circular economy actually is.
Yeah, I mean, circular economy, I think also in relation to what we're doing in Café Bueno, there is a lot more upcycling, as Catherine said. I don't think in general it would be completely accurate to describe it as a circular business model, because even though we are taking the coffee, we are also creating new value chains, either in the cosmetic industry, in the supplement industry. So we are, let's say, extending that coffee value chain into other industries and creating other circularities around it. So even though it's not immediately, let's say, put back into the coffee industry, it goes to contribute and to, let's say, to reduce the emissions of these other industries, while at the same time we give a better or a more efficient use to the coffee grounds instead of only using 1%. We don't think it makes a lot of sense to bring all these coffee beans from Colombia, Vietnam, or wherever they come from, where they put a lot of effort and work into them, just to use 1%. I mean, from a resource efficient point of view, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But I mean, as they have been discussing here, this is a generational change. I think if people would have been more aware of this 20, 30, 40 years ago, they could have started it, because I mean, personally, since we started Café Bueno, I think it didn't only make an environmental, let's say, and social sense, but economically, it's also the best way to go. So I think it touches a lot of the factors, but it's good that now it's actually, I think, as I was discussing with Sebastian and Catherine before, when we started Café Bueno 4 years ago, people didn't even knew that this was a thing. To say the way they told us that we were crazy, that why pick it up, why are you gonna do this, why that, why yeah. But I mean, here we are, and now it's actually a thing, and I mean, people are knocking our doors to collaborate with us, so that shows how important it is right now.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about circular economy and this matter from a larger perspective than just a crisis. But, you know, we're still in a pandemic, even though we're reaching the end of it, at least in the Western world. So we need at least one question where we target this. And I think it's super interesting to sort of talk about a crisis, even though it's been really tough for many people to talk about it as an opportunity as well. One of my favorite quotes is from the former mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who said, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." And what I mean by that is an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before. Sort of slightly touching on what Juan said, you know, things that you think is impossible, but there is a way. Or Joe Biden's, you know, Build Back Better. There is an opportunity to build back better and to do things that we haven't done before or in other ways. And the crisis hopefully catalyzes everything. Nina, what would you say about this? Like, in what way is this a great opportunity to transition into circular economy?
I think it's a great opportunity because we actually saw that if we want to solve problems fast, we can. And the whole global community came together to have the vaccines and to find the ways to secure the situation. So I think this is the same thing we can do with the climate emergency. So if we want, then we can do something. And I think this is, now we have the proof. We can act fast.
Yes.
So.
And what do you say, Catherine?
I think that part of the circular economy mindset is taking inspiration from nature, and natural systems have a lot of built-in resiliency. So for example, when ants are faced with a flood, they actually form a swarm because one ant would drown, but they're able to survive by banding together. And I think that the pandemic has showed that the importance of resiliency in how we currently are doing things. So it's exposed a lot of vulnerabilities, perhaps, in how we do things, especially when it comes to global supply chains, I would say. And we need to be able to thrive when times are tough and adjust in the face of the unexpected. So I think it's a huge learning opportunity and wake-up call, perhaps, to business as usual. But to echo something that Sebastian said earlier, now comes the most important part. We need to act on it.
It's interesting. I've seen plenty of people actually sort of an uprise in people mentioning indigenous peoples as well as a source of inspiration for the same reason that indigenous peoples usually, I'm generalizing now, are used to living closer to nature, or at least are used to handling resilience or building resilience in a way that we may not be in the Western world. So that's super interesting to hear. Sebastian, when we prepared for this talk, you mentioned that you see somewhat of an issue in that you see people transitioning towards a circular economy in a linear way. So we're trying to do it in a more traditional way of thinking, which might be an issue. So what you said was, when we try to benefit circular economies, we do it in the same way we always have done it. Can you please sort of develop this a little bit further? Why is that an issue?
Well, transforming towards a circular economy, we cannot simply optimize the linear economy. We need to transform towards a circular economy. And there's a challenge, and all the toolbox that we have is on how we can benefit linear economies. So we need to think outside the box on how we do things. And for example, one thing here is that when we're talking about the linear economy, we're talking often about how can we benefit sales of different products. And that is how we benefit those companies. But when we look at the circular economy, we need to look at the underlying mechanism of the circular economy. And that is, for example, the cost of labor, which is an issue that the circular economy is labor intensive. And also factors such as the take back of products. And for many circular companies, the problem is not selling products. It's getting products back and doing that in a big scale way. So we need to rethink the way we're trying to benefit things and actually do things in a completely other way. And we need to look at the return logistics and things like that. And another example also in the same sphere here is that a lot of companies and municipalities, for example, when they're procuring, they want to procure circular products, but in a linear way. They want X amount of products in one quantity. And the circular economy works a little bit different. It's what we have to sell is what we got, and what we get is what we buy from other companies. Our supply chain looks completely different from the linear economy. And in the linear economy, it's the more you buy of one product, the cheaper it is. But in the circular economy, in many cases, it can become more expensive if you buy more of one single product. Because then we need to source that specific computer model, for example, from all over the world for you to have that one. And we're seeing a lot of some organizations now, for example, looking that, well, we want this or an equivalent, for example. So we need to rethink the way we're doing things. And today we're thinking circular, but in the linear way.
I just want to mention, I realized I forgot to mention at the beginning of this panel that those of you who are listening are more than welcome to ask questions on especially Facebook in the chat, and we'll make sure to keep track of the questions. But also, I forgot to mention that those of you, the panelists who are joining us virtually, feel free to just chime in if you want to comment, add something to one of the other panelists' reflections. Let's make this discussion a lively one. Nina, you represent, at least here and now, the public sector. Yeah. Tell me, what is the role of the public sector here, and what hurdles or barriers do you see when it comes to making this transition within that sector?
I think Sebastian was touching about those points that I was also thinking, and we are talking about in the public sector and the Nordic collaboration. And the role of the public sector as the public procurement is huge, because we need to take and rethink how we do that, and we have to have new kind of measurements and new criteria in order to help the companies to join and kind of have the dialogue, so we educate each other as well. So what are the needs, and what is the truly circular way of thinking? So I think there is a huge opportunity, but there is also an obligation from the public side to step up and step in and help the companies, but also look at their own processes, as Sebastian was touching about. So I think the measurement of impact is one thing that we need to learn more about and rethink. And then, of course, like, what are the needs of the future? So how we kind of, that we don't just assume what are the needs and do the linear buying, but do the real circular, as Sebastian put it. So I think that's the one touch point that I would say, the public procurement.
When you mention it, I mean, Nordic collaboration is an important part of this conversation as well. Like, how can we actually make the transition to circular economies faster, more efficient, more sustainable, with collaboration over different types of borders, sector borders, but also country borders. And Catherine, you mentioned that you believe you already see great potential in the research that you've done, and feel free to mention the report that you've been part of writing, that you see great potential there already when it comes to collaboration, and that the industry can be a leading sort of sector in this. Tell us more about that.
Yes, so maybe I'll mention the report first. So we have been involved in a Nordic Council of Ministers report, which actually was just the first phase of the work was just published, and it was called Low Carbon Circular Transition in the Nordics. And in this work, we identified a number of areas with significant circular transition potential in the Nordic region. And this work was done with a Nordic-wide consortium, and RISE was the Swedish representative. So there were 4 areas in particular that had a common shared interest across the Nordic region, and that was bioeconomy, the food and beverage industry, the real estate and construction sector, and transport, logistics, and mobility. And then we also had 2 common drivers of circular change that we think what we found were perhaps very relevant for the Nordic region. So that was digitalization and new types of circular business models, especially those that increase the utilization of products and resources in the Nordic society. So I wanted to kind of mention the share, but of course it's important to note that while there are many things in common within the Nordic region, it's not homogeneous. So, it is a vast geographical area, and it ranges from densely populated capital regions to sparsely populated Arctic regions. But we're seeing a lot of efforts already within the Nordics to try to collaborate across the Nordics. One thing I could mention, for example, is the Nordic Circular Hotspot, which CradleNet from Sweden, who I sit on the board with Sebastian actually, and RISE was also part of starting this up. And that aims to accelerate the transition in the Nordic region, and not just across the region, but also with outside actors and different partners. I think now there's over 30 partners for the Nordic Circular Hotspot, aiming together to work together and find different solutions and share best practices.
Thank you. And Sebastian, you mentioned that you think that the Nordics are, to be honest, pretty bad, have bad preconditions, but high opportunity for circularity. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, and I think, and of course, in many cases, the Nordics are leading within sustainability, and we've come a far way. But also, we're one of the countries that are consuming the absolute most globally. We're one of the countries and the regions that's the furthest down the linear economy. So we have a far way to work back towards the circular economy, and that's a challenge. And as I mentioned also, the preconditions for the circular economy. As I mentioned before, that the circular economy is in many cases labor intensive, while the linear economy is not. It's resource intensive. And today we're taxing labor and not materials. So that's a huge challenge, especially in the Nordics, where we have some of the highest taxes on labor globally. And it is in the coming years that it's really going to be decided, where are the circular industries of the future going to be? And I hope that will be in the Nordics. But there's also really big challenges doing reuse and labor-intensive work, such as repair, refurbishment in the Nordics. So that's some challenges that we're standing in front for the coming years.
And Juan, back to you. I'm so curious, you working on Café Bueno and being an entrepreneur, what's your view on this? We spoke about the fact that you don't necessarily have to do this full on from the start. It's okay to do semi-circular efforts. Where should one start? And how can one start the transition when, for example, time or resources are scarce? Where would you recommend people to start?
I mean, I can speak, let's say, to relate it to a bit of our experience. When we started Café Bueno, for example, we started by recycling coffee from the coffee shops. So we started literally with our bikes, picking it up, and little by little, we scale up. But then, of course, as we needed more coffee and more, and meanwhile, the first coffee shops for them was pretty straightforward, to say the way. They give it to us without any concerns. When we started scaling up and, let's say, asking for bigger corporates and offices for the coffee, I mean, they either way were expecting it that we pick it up for free, which, as Sebastian mentioned, that is basically impossible for us to be free, because there's a labor, a time-consuming cost that goes there. And for us, it's difficult, but also for them to pay for it, it's difficult. So I think there's a gap there, a breach that should be done either through some incentives that the government, it should be taxed, that then goes to the personal side, to the corporate tax. I don't know. People can get creative around it, but there should be some incentives from the, let's say, recovery side. But then, when at the point that we are now, that we majorly, and also because of the Corona crisis, we had to, let's say, rekindle a little bit our strategy. Instead of urban waste, we focus on industrial waste, because coffee shops, airports, and all these things stopped basically consuming coffee. So we went to industrial, and with industrial, the situation was a bit different. They were more willing to give it to us, to say it that way, but of course they had a price for it, even though they were not doing anything probably with it. But it is, I don't know, I would say the dynamics of the industry, but again, also this plays into some of how you have to adapt your strategy depending on the market, not only market commercializing, but also, let's say, your supply, raw material, where it comes from. But yeah, I mean, this pandemic era also strengthened this decentralized biorefinery production model that we are aiming to do by picking up waste not only in Denmark, but we want to go to Finland, to Sweden. We believe that it's not a big manufacturing plant, rather a network of small, medium plants that serve local efforts.
Yeah, and we were talking about Nordic collaboration. Have you already benefited from that? What's your view on the importance of cross-national
Absolutely.
Collaboration? Tell us.
Absolutely, we have a very multicultural team. I'm originally from Colombia, and one of the reasons we ended up in the Nordics was because of our Swedish, Danish friends in general. They made this inception to come to the biggest coffee consuming region in the world to reside, to do something with the coffee. But then, for example, we have a Finnish investor that is this coffee company called Paulig. We have Danish investors. We have Swedish partners, Swedish investors as well. So I think in general, Catherine mentioned there's of course, not all countries are the same, and there are differences in themselves. But I think there are also a lot of commonalities that they join and band together. And I think that has been one of the keys. We cross-collaborate either also with universities or also with different investors that we currently have on board from the Nordics.
Great to hear. I'm turning to you now, Nina. We're going to talk about the playbook and more about sort of how to actually do this in real life and not just talk about it. But I would like to hear your thoughts on why the Nordic region is so important.
I think that we are so privileged. So in many ways, and I fully agree with Sebastian, that we can do much more and we should do more. So I think that that's obligate that when we are together, one of the largest economies in the world, so that as a possibility to take the questions also in the global arena. And we have the resources and we have kind of the knowledge and know-how and very strong legislation. So we can use our governmental structures to drive these changes and transformations. And I think that that's one of the reasons that we should concentrate the Nordics, or why we are important.
Yeah. Great. So tell us about the playbook.
Yeah, the playbook is actually addressing a lot of the questions that we have already talked about. And we started 4 years ago to talk about the circular transition, the Nordic innovation. And we wanted to address those questions of production and consumption in the Nordics. And different ideas and different tools came from that, hotspots being one of the forums that we are involved and many others. And then there was this idea to have something concrete. And we went out to the Nordics and were asking and looking for what has been already done. And actually in Finland, they had Sitra, had this playbook in the Finnish industrial companies or manufacturing companies. And we asked, is it possible to somehow scale it up and make it Nordic version of that? And it was, and we started to collaborate and included even more partners, and actually in co-creation and collaboration with more than 100 Nordic manufacturing companies, we end up this playbook, which is a toolbox to move from a linear business models towards the circular. And it is about know-how. It is very practical tools, printable tools from some you can go and start to create your own circular vision for your company and then act on that. So it is kind of taking by hand the whole way for the green and digital transition.
So it's both the theory, the whys, but also the hows and
the
templates.
Yes, and examples from those companies that are on this journey or already has been trying out or piloting, that even companies that are living the circular business models.
And if people who are listening want to find this playbook, where should they go?
They should go to our homepage.
Yes. So Nordic Innovations. Yes. And just Google Playbook and they will find it.
Yes.
Great. And you mentioned examples. I mean, it's super important to make it concrete by giving examples of companies who are doing either semi-circular transitions or full circular transitions. So I'm curious to hear your favorite examples of other organizations or companies who've done exciting transitions. Catherine, for example, what have you seen? You've already mentioned some. Can you mention some more that you've seen in your research?
Yes, so I think that's a great question. I was thinking a little bit about this, and I think a lot of times I often actually mention Enrigo, so but I let Sebastian talk about that. There's a small signage company, for example, in the south of Sweden called Acus. And Acus has not only, coming back to something that we talked about a little bit, Paulina, at the beginning of this panel, was about the importance of considering circular economy from even before you start production. And so one of the things that Acus has done is that they've been trying to design their signs in a modular way. Signage, when I say signage, I mean signs that you might see advertising the names of companies on the street. So they can be really large signs that hang, in public spaces. And so they've tried to make these modular and be able to get them back after the end of use and reuse them and design them so that they can also recycle them and get the valuable materials from them at the end of life. So that's one company. Another company that I think is quite interesting as well, because it shows that they're not just considering the product, but also the whole system behind it, is a startup from Sweden called Loopit. And so they they have tried to get rid of single-use packaging, and they have a take-back system, a whole reuse system. So they're combining digitalization and products. So when you get a takeaway coffee cup, you can drop it back off. And this can be applied to not just coffee cups, but they're also looking at how they can apply this and have this sort of be a logistical system for any product really in the world today.
Great. Thank you. And Sebastian, do you have any examples of companies that have inspired you or that you think are super cool when it comes to this?
Definitely. There's a lot of companies doing this and putting this into action. And one of those that Katie mentioned, Acus, is one of my favorite examples as well. But I really think it's so many good examples that is putting this into actions, from furniture, textiles, electronics, and a broad variety of different products. So there's so many to choose from. It's difficult to do this. And I would say, if you want good examples, go into Katie's pod, Getting in the Loop. I love listening to that and getting a lot of great examples of different companies putting this into action. And it's really great seeing this. Well, of course, I'm way into electronics and how we can be doing that, but there's so many opportunities within pretty much every product group or stream, and creating resources from that. And I think the key here is, we've talked about it a little bit, that we don't have to have the perfect circular from the beginning. We have to have steps there. And I think Johan mentioned that good, that you started with this one way of working and you developed that while you went on. And I would like to say that to companies, organizations listening here, it's not about being perfectly, fully circular. It's about having this first step. And it can be a circular supply into the product. It can be a renewable product that you sell in a linear way, or it can be a linear product and you have a circular business model capturing that and the residual value. So there's just so much to choose from.
Very great point. I just realized that I can't see the Facebook questions on my iPad. So while I ask the next question, I'm just going to ask someone in the team to bring my iPhone to me so that I can see. I definitely don't want to miss your questions out there. One of my last questions is about the future, of course. So I'm turning to you again, Nina. What do you see in the future when it comes to circular economies? What excites you the most, or what is the sort of biggest challenge that you think has to be solved to succeed?
I think from the public sector point of view, I think I mentioned the public procurement. I think that's one of the biggest opportunities, because it's a huge opportunity for the companies, but it's also a challenge. So that's one thing. And then I think that the opportunities that, or what we're going to see in the future, is that because the investors are increasingly interested of the circular business models, so we need to kind of educate our companies and our investors and the whole ecosystem to think differently. And I think that there's a lot to learn from the companies that are on the journey. And I fully agree. It doesn't have to be kind of perfect circular solutions from the beginning, but on the way we learn. And the more dialogues and yes, educating also the finance sector.
Yeah, thank you. And Juan, what about you? What do you see in the future?
I think we live in exciting times, in particular in our area, but in general, I think everything that is going around biotechnology, chemistry, synthetic biology, all of these different technologies, artificial, there's a lot of things going on. And I do believe that when all these things start to combine itself, a lot of exciting things will come up. But right now we're seeing people recycling, upcycling, even with insects, with fungi, with bacteria. They're breaking it down, they're bringing it back together in different things, similar to what we do with coffee. So I think right now is mostly up to, let's say, to entrepreneurs and in general innovators and researchers, up to our creativity to set the way to what we want to tackle and how we want to tackle. But I do believe the technologies are out there that can help us to contribute to a fully circular economy in the next 5 to 10 years. And in the Nordics also, I think we also have the tools available for us to develop this further.
Yeah. I totally agree. It's mind-boggling to think about it, the possibilities that we have out there. And Sebastian, what about you? And what do you see in the future for either your own company or the society in general when it comes to sustainability and circular economy?
I think that John really touched on a really important point there, that the technology is there. Of course, we can benefit from more being put there, but the OECD made a really great report, and they said that technology is one of the lowest barriers for making this transition happening. So there's a lot of other barriers that we need to tackle, but we can already today put resources into a lot better use, and in a lot of ways doing that in a profitable way for everybody involved. And I'm really optimistic, and I think at Inrego we've been doing this for 25 years. And 25 years ago, people were wondering why we're buying and selling used electronics. And if we only look back 5 years ago, people were, in some cases, people were ashamed of buying refurbished electronics. Today, they're bragging about that. So there's a big change happening, and it's going really rapid, and it's going more rapid than ever. And I would say one last key takeaway there is also that the differences between the low-value products and the high-value products. With the high-value products, it is a lot easier creating this economically benefit business models for everybody involved. We're paying a lot for used electronics, and as you said, Johan, with the coffee, it's a bit more tricky with that. And if you look at plastics, and I think if you look at low-value products and high-value products, we stand for completely different situations. With low-value products, we need more political intervention, and we need more technology in some cases. But in high-value products, we in a lot of cases just need behavioral change. So that's something that we can do already today.
And last but not least, Catherine, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Paulina. So I think Nina mentioned finance, and we're seeing it rise. That is a very important topic because it can be a significant enabler for circular business models, but it also currently oftentimes is a large barrier for implementing circular business models. Business models in circular economy and linear economy are essentially at odds because the current approach of linear economy is sell more, sell faster, as we've kind of talked about in this panel. And circular economy emphasizes selling more times, using more times. So to capitalize on products that last, say, 4 times as long, you need to ensure that your business model or how you're doing business aligns with this circular approach. And that's a challenge that we need to sort of overcome. But I'm confident that we can do that. Maybe from other disruptions, they might tell us a bit of a hint, like internet technology that didn't primarily benefit those who kept their old business models the same. So yeah, you can just ask video rental store owners.
Thank you so much. And it's actually time for us to wrap up already. I mean, I could talk about this for another hour or so. We don't have any questions as far as I can see on Facebook. So I just want to say a huge thank you to the four of you who've joined this panel here today. Great perspectives. I love how you complement each other with different perspectives. And för er som har lyssnat, nu går jag över till svenska igen. Tack så jättemycket för att ni har varit med oss idag. Det går såklart att titta på det här innehållet, de här 3 seminarierna som är del av det nordiska samarbetet i efterhand på Facebook men också på hemsidan. Och vill ni fortsätta diskussionen i sociala medier får ni jättegärna använda hashtag NRPOL och Twitter-handeln NordenSK. Nordensk. Så tack så jättemycket. Ha en underbar fortsatt Almedalsvecka om det är det ni ska göra, eller en fortsatt underbar sommar om ni tar semester härmed. Tack igen. Tack.